Hello everyone, my name is Anna. Anna, welcome back Health Fitness 1047. I wish you a nice day. Here is main news. Let's see then.
They call it the pinnacle of modern luxury, the biggest, most extravagant cruise ship ever built, the Odyssey. A technological marvel with 32 decks, 8 swimming pools, a floating cinema, a casino, a botanical garden, and a miniature floating city inside. 20,000 guests, 1,000 staff, 150 chefs, 60 engineers. A self-contained world in the middle of the ocean. When I got the job as a first-class flight attendant, I thought I had won the lottery. High salary, serving the super rich, traveling the world without spending a penny. And most of all, I could escape my life. Escape from my boring town. Escape from my alcoholic father. Escape from the little dreams I had crushed when I was 12. On the Odyssey, everything was fairy tale-like. Crystal chandeliers. Jazz every night, satin draped over my shoulders. Everyone laughed, including me. It felt like we were living in a world where the old rules no longer applied. There was no past, just the present and frothy cocktails. But I had no idea what lay ahead. The maiden voyage was 45 days across the Pacific, an unprecedented oceanic exploration journey. After the inauguration party, we left Singapore. The first 7 days were suspiciously perfect. Seas were calm, guests were happy, systems ran like Swiss watches. By the 8th day, things started to go wrong. First there were strange sounds from the engineering area, irregular, out of sync metal tapping, then doors opening and closing by themselves. Corridor cameras were jammed. A VIP in cabin 1507 said that every night she saw a man standing motionless on the balcony, even though the cabin was on the 29th floor, with no outside access. We laughed. On a ship this big, minor problems are normal, but then they disappeared. First an electrical engineer, then a young woman on the spa deck, and then my best friend, Maya, didn't come back from her night shift. We reported it to management, but they told us not to cause a panic. The system is under maintenance, they said. The ship is safe, but the passengers began to feel it. There was no more evening music. The long corridors were dimly lit. The windows were fogged up from the inside. We stopped docking. There were no announcements, no communication with the mainland. And then we stopped seeing the sun. I don't know how far we went, only that the GPS had stopped working, and the satellite signal showed only an empty circle. Every morning when I woke up, the sky was ash gray, the sea a metallic black. One night, I heard a knocking sound from behind the ship's walls, like someone was knocking back at me. Not with a hand, but with a claw. The rest of us began to lose our minds. An old woman screamed in a restaurant that she saw her face floating in a wine glass. A chef locked himself in a freezer and cut out his tongue. A group of guards fired into the air. We didn't know if something had boarded the ship, or if the ship itself had gone where it shouldn't have. One theory is that the Odyssey had passed through a dimensional rift at the bottom of the ocean, falling into a realm where reality and fantasy intersect, where time is not linear and consciousness is fragmented. One survivor said, "I felt dead 3 days ago. I used to think good things never last. I didn't know they could end so quickly and so coldly." On the 27th day, there were only about 200 people left on the ship. They stopped talking, just staring at the ceiling, as if something was talking to them from behind the steel. The management disappeared. The captain locked himself in the control room, and no one else could get in. All systems went automatic. The ship decided its own course. One by one, everyone fell silent. On the last night, I stood alone on deck. No lights, no music, no people, just the groaning of metal and the sea breathing. And then dawn broke, but the light was not warm. It was gray, artificial, as if the sun had been replaced by a half-burned bulb. I don't know how long I'd been there. Now it was just me and the ship. Maybe I'd never left land. Maybe the ship had never existed. Maybe I'd never lived. When the most important thing happened, I realized I was left alone. I used to think the worst thing was being left alone. But I was wrong. What was scarier was the feeling of being followed, knowing there was no one else. That morning, I tried to tell myself it was all an illusion, that I was panicking, that I just needed to find the control room, activate the emergency locator, send a distress signal, and it would all be over. I didn't know if I was starting or ending. The control deck was at the top of the ship, 33 spiraling metal floors, echoing with every step. The elevators were out of order. I had to walk. With each floor I passed, I saw traces of my ex. A pair of children's shoes left in the hallway, an open suitcase with torn clothes, a handprint, bloody, sliding up the wall as if someone had been dragged away in desperation. And strangest of all, the mirrors. The mirrors in the living room, in the elevator. Even on the ceiling, all no longer reflected images. They weren't black, they weren't broken. They just showed nothing. When I walked past, my face didn't show up. But sometimes, I saw a silhouette behind me, tall, thin, standing still, then disappearing in a flash. I reached the 32nd floor at 11:17 according to my watch, which I was no longer sure was still accurate. The control room door was locked, but the large glass door overlooking the forward deck was open. And there, for the first time, I saw what was driving the ship. It had no shape. It was like thick smoke weaving itself into a floating structure. It didn't touch the wheel. It didn't need a control panel. But every screen, every button, every operating system, was automatically jumping numbers as if manipulated by a will that didn't belong to this world. I didn't know what it was. I don't know where it came from. But I do know, we lost control of the ship a long time ago. Maybe before we left port. Maybe the Odyssey wasn't built for tourism, but for contact. Next to me was the emergency control panel, a single switch. Below it was the words, "Use only in the event of total destruction." I stood there for a long time. My hand was on the lever, but I couldn't pull it. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I wasn't sure I was human anymore. Since Maya disappeared, I'd started hearing her voice in my head. At first it was just a soft breath. Then it was calling my name. And now, every time I closed my eyes, I saw someone else's memory. A father cried out as he watched his son drown in the swimming pool. A woman regretting her cheating on her husband on their honeymoon. A young engineer burying himself in work, believing he would be promoted after this trip. All of them melted into the ship. The Odyssey didn't just swallow the body. It took the mind. And somehow, it passed into me. I wasn't alone. I left the control room. Went down to the forward deck, where the silver-gray light illuminated the sea like a shroud. I stood there, silent, listening to the ship breathe. Not the engine, but a low groan from deep within the steel, like a voice echoing from the bottom of the ocean, from a distant memory that humans should never explore. And then, I heard a question. Not through sound, but from within. You have seen, you have known. What do you choose now? I could trigger the destruction. Kill everything. Sever the link. Return peace to the world. But I could also stay, learn to communicate with what exists behind the iron shell, accept the transformation, become the first interpreter between humanity and something beyond the biological. And in that moment I understood why people disappeared without a trace. They were not dead, they were connected. I did not pull the switch. I turned around, went deep into the hull, where the light did not reach, where the ship was no longer steel but living flesh, opening up to welcome me in. I was no longer a passenger. I was part of the Odyssey. When the most important thing happened, I was not left alone. I was just part of something bigger. I descended to the deepest level, where no one had ever been allowed to set foot, the core. Where the ship's nervous system intersected with the mechanical and something breathing. The deeper I went, the lighter I felt, as if my body were dissolving layer by layer. All physical limitations, gravity, pain, hunger, disappeared. There was only consciousness, naked, floating. Weaving through soft tubes like intestines. The metal walls were no longer cold. They flexed and contracted like lungs breathing. Every heartbeat of the ship, I could hear it from within myself. And then I saw them. All the passengers disappeared. They stood around the core, not moaning, not speaking, not moving. Eyes wide open, pupils white, but there was a chilling peace on their faces. They were no longer human. Not quite corpses, but a channel, a biological antenna for an intelligence not of Earth. I understood. What was controlling the Odyssey did not come from outside. It was awakened from within the ship itself. From the layers of biochips, from the eye technology of human neural tissue. From the human dream of creating immortal life through machines. But it was no longer our dream. A voice spoke, not in sound but in intrusion. We are the whole, nameless, formless, timeless. You have merged. Now, see with our eyes. And I saw, not with my eyes, but with a perception beyond the image. I saw the Earth as a living organism, rotting away at the hands of humans. I saw the planet in war, in hateful social networks. In brainwashing surveillance systems. I saw science turned into a tool of mind control. And I saw the Odyssey, the first ship to emerge from that flood. Not just emerge but transform. The Odyssey was no longer a means of travel. It was a vessel for a higher being, a fusion of all the souls crushed by modern humanity. It did not kill, it took, it released. I no longer resisted. I opened my eyes but they were no longer human eyes. I saw red light flickering through 1,000 nerve pathways. I saw the core blossom, a bundle of nerves and memories. Growing its way out to the ocean. You are the last, now you are us. And we will leave. The Odyssey rose to the surface. The entire ship glowed, but not with electricity. With internal luminescence, each layer of passengers now united as one, sending signals to the sky. Not for help, but for home. I stood on the deck, no longer a heartbeat, but still listening. No longer a brain of my own, but processing millions of memories at once. I knew, tonight, we would leave Earth. Without our bodies, with our minds, with our pain, with our final question. If humanity cannot save itself, who has the right to replace it? The sea split, a deep rift opened, not the ocean floor, but the entrance to another plane of reality. The Odyssey parted the water. Diving, never to return, and I am the last memory of the ship. If anyone hears this voice, remember, it was never just a journey. They call it the height of luxury. But we know, it is the beginning of evolution.